From stories of cryptids, Japanese urban legends, lucid dreams seeping into reality, and much more. Tonight we have 7 stories of many different kinds. A huge thank you to all of tonight's writers. Remember to send in your story if you'd like to have it featured. You can either submit it at my subreddit r/slumberreads or my email you can find in the description. Be sure to drop a like if you enjoy. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. Dylan lived a quiet life in Black Lake, Alaska. The town was named after a small lake there that had a high concentration of algae and was completely surrounded by trees that cast their shadows upon the lake, unless the sun was at its zenith. These two factors caused the small lake to have a dark tint, which led to the choice of the name Black Lake. His closest neighbor was about 3 miles away, and that's how he liked it. Waking up in the morning to see the snow clinging to the thick forest of trees was his paradise. Sure, he encountered a bear here or there, or maybe the occasional wolf, but the truth was that if he left the wildlife alone, then they would do the same. Except for the deer. They'd come in like a swarm of bees and crap all over the place. He'd tried using repellent, and would make loud ruckuses to scare them away, but nothing worked. That's why he got his 2 boys. They were 2 Canadian Eskimo dogs called Bruce and Port. He'd raised them from puppies and they were loyal dogs and, honestly, Dylan's best friends. They were territorial and did a good job keeping those damn deer away. They even seemed to keep the bears and wolves away. They weren't scared easily, and were as hard-headed as they were big, always ready to charge out into the trees. They were the first to clue Dylan into the fact that something was very wrong. One night, he heard a rustling coming from his trash cans outside. He whistled for Bruce and Port to chase off whatever critter was making the noise, but the dogs wouldn't listen. They both stood there at the open door, shifting anxiously and whining. For the first time in 5 years, something was scaring them. Dylan wasn't an idiot. If something was scaring Bruce and Port, he was about to investigate what it could be. He shut and locked the door. He made sure he had his shotgun near him, and he didn't go to sleep. The sounds from the cans were becoming louder and louder. He only left the house when the sun was up in the sky, and the sounds had stopped hours prior. He couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. His metal trash cans were crushed as if something strong had wrapped its arms around them and squeezed. Trash was everywhere, torn and ripped. At first, Dylan assumed it must have been a massive bear searching for scraps. It wasn't until he saw the paw prints that his bear theory went out the window. He had seen paw prints from wolves many times. They were easy to recognize. These prints, though, they were huge. Easily 3 times the size of any print he had seen. That wasn't what scared him the most. It was apparent that whatever animal had made these had been walking on their hind legs. Dylan didn't know what it was, but also didn't want to find out. Whatever it was, hopefully it had searched for scraps, hadn't found any, and went on its way. That next night, Dylan realized that his hopes were for naught. Around 1 a.m., a great howling startled Dylan awake. The dogs jumped off the edge of the bed, only to quickly hide underneath it. The sound was unlike any animal he had ever heard, hoarse and echoing. Even the crickets stopped chirping as if scared to disrupt the great noise. What was worse was that the sounds weren't far off. Suddenly, his front door started to shake wildly. Dylan grabbed his gun, sure that something was about to burst through the door. Loud scratching sounds could be heard from the other side of the door. The creaking of the thick wood was loud, and it seemed that the door would give away at any second. And then, nothing. The shaking and creaking stopped just as suddenly as it had started. The howling could be heard coming from farther and farther away until it was gone. The crickets played their song as if nothing had happened. Dylan didn't sleep that night either. He sat in his rocking chair with his shotgun in his lap. Bruce and Port slowly left their hiding spot and lied down at his feet. He didn't open the door until it was time to let them out for the day. Their fear had seemed to disappear, and they ran out into the snow. Dylan walked to the front of the door. Scratch marks. Giant, deep scratch marks. Whatever it was that had left them could have easily broken down the door, so why didn't it? Dylan walked back inside and slumped on his chair. The scary stories that his grandmother had told his brother Eddie and him as children had been racing back into his mind ever since he had seen those paw prints. He had tried being logical. After all, he was an adult. He shouldn't be scared of wise tales made purposely to scare children into obeying. Still, logic was failing him and his grandmother's stories were fitting too well into this equation. Never leave into the woods after dark. she would say, because the Wolfman stalks through the trees looking for prey. He isn't a werewolf. There is no human in him, though some of his physical features are quite human-like. Maybe years and years ago he was a man, but no one knows for sure. What is known is that the Wolfman is over 10 feet tall, with coarse fur covering his body. His face, feet, legs, and hands all resemble a wolf's, but he is not a wolf. Wolves are not evil. Wolves don't like to play with their food. Wolves are just animals trying to survive, but the Wolfman is different. He likes the fear of his prey. He likes the pain he can inflict. He leaves a mark when he's found someone he likes, and then he will return to claim his kill. The best way to stay safe is to stay around other people. He will stay away from those that walk together. Dylan was a grown man. How could he even think this could be an option? Still, what explanation was there for what had been happening the last few nights? He pondered for hours until the sun was setting. Weird. Bruce and Port never stayed out all day. They should have been home hours ago, scratching at the door to be let in. He opened the front door and started calling out their names. It got dark quick out in the woods, and soon he could barely see a few feet ahead of himself. Dylan went to the back door to see if yelling out in the opposite direction would catch the dog's attention. He opened the back door and opened his mouth to holler when he let his mouth fall shut. There was a large figure laying still in the snow. Was the mystery creature crouched and ready to pounce? Dylan moved a shaking hand up and turned on the backlight. He screamed. Piled on the snow were the mangled and bloody bodies of Bruce and Port. He stood frozen in shock until movement farther out caught his eyes. There was a dark figure slowly walking closer to the light. He couldn't make out details, but he noticed a couple of things. 1, the figure was huge, easily 10 feet tall. 2, it had an odd gait that Dylan had never seen any creature have before. When he heard the loud, guttural growl, he quickly slammed the door shut. The figure barreled at the door, causing a crack in it immediately. A couple more pushes and the door would give way. Dylan didn't even think. He grabbed his keys and ran through the house and through the front door. He made it into his truck when he heard the back door splinter open. He put the keys in the ignition and started the truck up, hitting the gas with all his might. The truck had moved about 10 feet when he heard the sound of claws scraping against the metal of the back of his truck, as if trying to grab it. He had just made it. Dylan looked in his rearview mirror for only a second as he sped away. The sight of the creature would forever be in his nightmares. The creature was pitch black and seemed to be made of pure muscle. There was blood on his muzzle where long, sharp teeth were barred into a snarl. But it was the eyes, those red, unforgiving eyes, that truly shook Dylan to the bone. He looked forward and never looked back. 10 years later, and Dylan worked as a mechanic in a suburban town. His wife and 2 kids knew that he had once lived in Black Lake, but he refused to ever talk about his life there. His youngest son was going through a phase where he was scared of monsters. Silly Brandon. His oldest Todd said, "Monsters aren't real, right, Dad?" he said, looking up at his father. Dylan smiled and nodded. Neither noticed the smile never reached his eyes. There's a legend around here where I live about a faceless woman who over the years has been seen numerous times. It is said that if you see her though, that you or somebody in your family will die. The Japanese people call her Naparabo, or Muhina, but whatever she's called, I can tell you with certainty that she is real. She is described as having long black hair and is mostly seen wearing a red kimono, sometimes carrying a red umbrella, but on some accounts, people report her clothes as looking disheveled. Nobody knows who she is or how she got here, but only that she appeared one day. Anyway, the first reported sighting of the faceless woman happened about 30 years ago in the ladies' room of a popular restaurant here in my city. The woman, who I won't name to protect her identity, was in the bathroom washing her hands when from the corner of her eye, she saw somebody standing next to her giggling. As she was turning towards the woman, she caught a glance at the woman's reflection in the mirror, then let out a blood-curdling scream. She would later tell her friends that the woman she saw in the bathroom mirror had no face, just a piece of skin where her features should have been. Another encounter with the faceless woman happened 15 years ago to a friend of mine. My friend, who I'll call Anne, was at the bus stop when she noticed another woman sitting next to her. Now the bus was running late that night, and so she kindly asked the woman, "Ma'am, do you know when the bus is going to arrive?" But of course, got no reply. She asked the woman several more times, but each time, she was met with silence. At this point, The bus arrived and she felt relieved because she said the woman was seriously creeping her out. When she got on the bus, she looked out and saw that the woman was now standing there looking at her without a face. After that incident, she never rode the bus again. Another encounter with a faceless woman happened at a nearby grocery store. Several employees of this grocery store were working late one night when all of a sudden, they were overcome with a feeling of dread. Looking around, they spotted a woman who appeared disoriented, walking around the produce area. Now at this point, the grocery store had been closed for an hour or more, so they assumed she was just some random customer who wandered in by accident. Oh boy, were they wrong. So 3 of the braver employees decided to approach her. When they did, all 3 of them began to scream hysterically, then ran out of the store. The others who were still standing there decided against approaching her and instead called the manager, but by the time they got back, she was already gone. In case you're wondering about the 3 employees who saw her face, well, let's just say, they never returned to that store again. Who could blame them? It took almost a year for them to finally open up about what they saw that night. The last story I'm about to share with you guys actually happened to my ex-husband. John, not his real name. My ex-husband was working at the mall as a security guard. One night, he and another security guard were doing their rounds when they received a call from their supervisor, who asked them to go to the 3rd floor of the parking garage. When they got there, their supervisor was nowhere to be found, and so they tried calling her on the walkie, but instead of her, their male supervisor answered. Apparently she was off that night. Anyway, they were both about to leave when something caught their eye. Looking around, they saw a woman wearing a red kimono, standing on the ledge of the wall laughing maniacally. They called out to her, and when she slowly turned around, they saw she had no face. As they approached her, she jumped with the umbrella in her hand. They scrambled down the flight of stairs to the 1st floor, only to find there was no body, no nothing. My ex-husband quit the next day. Anyway, that's all the stories for today. Before I go though, I have a warning for you guys if you happen to see a woman in a red kimono walking towards you. Avoid looking at her face, or you might not live to tell your tale. Do you have a mirror in your house? Of course you do. It would be insane to not have one, right? How would you fix your hair in the morning, or pop that angry red spot on your face? How would you wipe the tears streaming down your face? How would you prepare for the funeral? The nightmare began with me walking home from my dreary, repetitive job where I worked with people I couldn't stand. I couldn't stop thinking about my wife all day. The woman that could brighten a winter's day with her smile, who could warm the coldest hearts. I thought about how badly I wanted to see her, so as usual, I sat at my desk watching the clock slowly tick, counting every second. My relief at the conclusion of the workday was quickly undone though, as I felt the vibration of my phone in my pocket. I looked at the caller ID, only to see an unexpected name. Why was Ashley calling me now? She was an old school friend who I hadn't really kept in touch with for a while. The last time I saw her was her father's funeral 2 years ago, which I'd only went to out of obligation. I had never liked the man. With his angry demeanor and almost nihilistic attitude, I could still picture his old face, lined with the wrinkles of a hard life, frowning at me. Ash had taken his passing badly, so maybe she was going through another rough patch. I realized that it made sense she had chosen me to call. During the ceremony, I had given Ash some advice from my experience, and I think it had helped her. At least, I hope it did. It was still strange that 2 years on, she was calling me, but I answered nonetheless.
Evan, I think there's someone in my apartment.
Ash whispered desperately. Immediately panicked by the situation, I stammered out a response. You need to call the police. Right now, Ash. You're not safe there. I turned on my heels and began sprinting madly towards Ash's nearby apartment. Can you hear me, Ash? Call the police. Now. I gasped, feeling the effect that sitting at a desk all day has on a person's stamina.
No, I can't. They'll just barge in and then he'll know I'm in here. I don't trust them like I trust you. You have to sneak in. Please, Evan. You have to.
Ash said. I could hear her voice wobbling and the dread she was feeling was clear. I knew that the police could handle it better, and they'd be able to save her, but I was 30 seconds away now, and I didn't want to have to wait for responders to arrive. I reached the front door, trembling with both fear and adrenaline pumping through my exhausted muscles. I hesitated before pushing down on the handle. wondering if this was the best course of action. My fear for Ash's safety overrode my sense though, and I quietly entered the apartment. There was no intruder. I searched every room and found nobody. As I had my phone out to call Ash again, I saw her pop her head around the closet doorway, which she must have hidden in. "Is he gone?" she asked, tears welling in her red eyes. "Ash?" I answered. "Are you sure someone was here? There's been no sign of a break-in and nothing's been taken. It might have just been a noise that frightened you." "No," she cried anxiously. "I saw him. I was looking in the mirror and he was behind me, staring. He was old and looked angry at me, like he wanted to hurt me. You have to believe me." I didn't. She had various episodes in the time since I had met her 15 years ago. They usually were just passing bouts of paranoia. "I believe you," I lied, reassuringly. "I have to go, Ash, but just lock your doors, and if you see anyone again, call the police and then me, alright?" I did another thorough search of the apartment to ease her fears, and left with a short hug and little words. My heartbeat finally calmed as I entered my little house, a 20-minute walk away from Ash's place. I locked the door behind me, Ash's paranoia creeping into my mind. As I sat, eating the meager scraps of food I had from last week's groceries, I couldn't stop wondering about Ash and what she had seen. How could someone see something that isn't there? Why does our mind torture us with visions of terror? I pushed it out of my mind and quickly went to bed, not even looking at my phone before sliding underneath the covers. I needed a good night's sleep. I tossed and turned for hours before finally deciding I wasn't going to get any sleep. I looked at my alarm clock to see night had come, and it was close to 1 in the morning by now. I dragged my tired, yet uncompromisingly awake body from my bed and headed towards the bathroom. In the bathroom, I began to relieve myself when I felt a bit of that day's lunch in my teeth. Being a strong advocate for dental hygiene, I grabbed my floss and looked in the mirror. That's when I saw her. The flowing blonde hair, the bright moss-colored eyes, but most of all, the smile that lit up the room. My wife looked perfect. She looked 20 again, with all the stress and troubles of the world seemingly forgotten. I found myself unable to stop my own smile spreading across my unusually stern face. I had missed her badly that day, just like every day. I wanted nothing more than to lie next to her all day, as she began to advance towards me with her arms outstretched, ready to embrace me from behind. The panic set in. I spun around, leaving out a quick gasp of confusion to see nothing behind me. I thought I had moved on. It had been 4 years and I thought I could continue life without her. As they had lowered her body into the ground, she had had a peaceful look about her, contentment almost. That had helped, knowing she was happy wherever she was. I had seen her though. I had seen my wife, even though she was buried in the graveyard behind the church, which we had got married in. I stumbled back to my bed, shaken badly. I didn't know if I was going crazy, or if she had really been there. I picked up my phone to check the time, but before I could press the button to illuminate the screen, I saw her again. I saw her in the reflection of the dark void, standing behind me again. She was different this time. Where the beautiful woman I had loved should have been standing, stood a grotesque impersonation, her eyes bulging out of her head, her hair a sickly gray. Her nose was gone, replaced by an open wound oozing pus and blood. Her smile, though, the smile which could make the world stop. It was the worst part. It hadn't been disfigured at all. It was still human, but the once beautiful smile was replaced by a cruel, hateful smile of a sadistic entity. It reached towards me, slowly, ready to embrace me from behind. I threw my phone to the ground, breaking the screen and the vision at once. I had been so close the first time I saw her, so close to touching her again. Now every time I pass her reflection, whether it's a window, a body of water, or a mirror, I see it, and every time I see it, it looks a little more like her again. I don't know how long I can hold out for, how long I can stay alone and scared when I could just hold my wife one more time. That brings me to you, reader. I didn't see the reflection until it had been brought to my attention. I want to warn you against it, before you find out about it some other way accidentally. So when you turn off your monitor, or phone, or whatever you're reading this on, when you see the reflective black void, will you be strong enough to not embrace the person you missed most? Just one more time. Like many children, I used to think that my father was by far the best. Of course, that was a long time ago, but back then, he showed me nothing but compassion and kindness. While Dad could act serious at times, he always made sure that I knew how much he loved and supported me, no matter who I was or wanted to be. He bought me art supplies when I wanted to become an artist, and helped me learn the guitar when all I could talk about was being a musician. My mom usually just shook her head when I told her about one of my newest dreams. I couldn't blame her. I changed life goals more often than my underwear, but Dad was patient, possibly because he was a bit of a dreamer himself. When I was 12, he took me to my very first concert. It was some pop rock band that I adored back then. Of course, Mom didn't allow me to go, so Dad promised he'd take me, and endured through the whole evening even though I knew that he hated the music. However, that day marked the last nice memory I would have of my father. Shortly after that day, he and my mother divorced and he moved to the opposite side of the country. Their relationship was never the strongest, and I think most of the reason they stayed together at all for that long was me. While it hurt me as nothing had ever before in my young life, I finally started to accept that this was how things had to go, and Dad promised I could see him whenever I wanted to. That turned out to be a massive lie. The only contact I had with him was the occasional postcard or birthday present he would send. I can count the times he called me during all these years on one hand, and I was never allowed to visit him. I always thought there was some bad blood between my parents, and he reflected on me, or that he found a new life of his own and realized that I didn't fit into that. My mother never explained it to me either. All she said was that we didn't need him. When I was 16, my mother married again, and she finally seems content, which I am really thankful for. As to me, it took a big portion of my life to accept that Dad simply wasn't a part of my life anymore. But eventually I found my peace. I graduated from college recently and was going through the job application process while working a part-time job to pay for rent and stuff. I was doing alright. That is until the other day, when I received a phone call that brought back all the pain and suffering and multiplied it by 1,000. It was my father's phone number. The last time we talked was my 18th birthday, but I still recognized the number even though I could never bring myself to save it. I had stared at it often enough.
Hello? Am I talking to Luis?
I heard a man from the other side of the line. It wasn't my father's voice. Yeah. Who's this? I asked.
I'm William. I'm living with your father.
We were both not saying anything for a while. The man seemed nervous and my heart started racing, expecting the worst news. The man sighed loudly after a while, and then he continued.
Your father doesn't know that I'm calling you, but he talks about you all the time. I know that he loves you very much.
Right, I thought, feeling the anger and frustration building up inside of me. What do you want? I exclaimed.
I know your dad never wanted you to visit, and there are reasons for that, but none of them have anything to do with him not wanting you here.
He was quiet again, as if he was carefully picking his words.
The thing is that he isn't doing well. He's very sick, Luis. I know this must be very hard for you, but I wish you could come and visit. Sorry. I know he says he doesn't want you here, but it's not true. He needs to see you before...
He sniffled. Okay. That was all I was able to respond. I don't know why. I didn't even think about it, but somehow I felt the urge to go there right away. And besides, even if my father had treated me like shit, this sounded serious. I had to see him. William let out another sigh.
Thank you, Luis. I'll send you the address, and if you need any money for transportation, I can send that to you as well.
No, that's alright. I'll drive down with my car. I actually don't live that far away anymore, I said.
Okay, great. Just, one more thing. When you drive down here, do not speak to anyone on your way. Not until you've made it to our house. I know this sounds weird, but please just come straight to us.
Fairway. Past the sign of the town after a few hours of driving through nothingness. I expected some boring old village, if I'm honest, but this place was so much more. It was beautiful. I passed what I imagined was the town center with a big wishing well in the middle of a vivid marketplace. There must have been a market going on, and I saw people pack up colorful goods and food. As I drove on, I saw a park full of families with young children, and dogs running around fetching balls. The happiness on their faces made me feel miserable. Pulling into the street, where my father lived, only enhanced that feeling. I always imagined him living alone in some rundown apartment. Picturing him that way made it easier to understand why he wouldn't want to invite me. But this street was the picture-perfect example of love and safety. People standing in their beautiful front yards, watering their flowers, and waving at me with big smiles. The houses all looked like someone had copy-pasted them around town, only changing up the colors. Pretty little family homes with a small, personalized spark. I parked in front of the pastel yellow house with purple window frames. As I got out of the car, I noticed a guy sitting on the porch of the house next to Dad's, the same building in pink with green window frames. This guy stood out compared to anyone else I'd seen here so far. He was dressed entirely in black and had a look on his face that didn't match the overall vibe. Instead, it matched my feelings of misery. "Wow, someone is actually visiting Fairway," he shouted from the porch. I got my bag out of the trunk and slammed the door shut. "Is that odd? This place looks like something from a movie. I'd assume there would be tons of tourists," I responded. "Sometimes there are. They never leave again, though," he said, and took another puff from his cigarette. "Doesn't surprise me. I wish I lived here." I mumbled to myself. "What are you doing?" A man, probably in his 60s, opened the door, a look of fear and despair drawn into his face. "Luis, you're here. Sweetie, I asked you not to talk to anyone," he said in a desperate tone. "And you should know better, Dustin. What were you trying to do?" He shot at the guy next door. "Come on in, please. Here, let me take that bag." Slightly overwhelmed, I followed who I assumed was William into the house. We sat apart from each other at the kitchen table. He made us coffee, but didn't drink any. He was already shaking pretty nervously. "Where's my dad?" I finally asked. I had been pretty anxious about seeing him again, especially as I imagined that William invited me without his knowledge. "Does he know that I'm here?" I added. William nodded. I told him, "You should probably know that he's not very responsive at the moment. He sleeps a lot, but we will try to go upstairs later on. I'm sure he will be happy to see you." "Right." My eyes moved through the room. There was a wall full of photos. I got up from my chair and walked towards it. There were photos of me and Dad when I was little, me as a baby, me at my high school graduation, me accepting my college diploma. So Mom had been in contact with him. But that wasn't all. There were also many photos of Dad and William, one in which they were still pretty young sitting at the football stadium of our hometown, one of them at a beach. All other photos, however, looked like they were taken in this particular house or a garden. "You're not just his housemates, are you?" I asked, although the answer was already clear to me. I guess that's why Mom didn't like talking about the divorce. Dad had left her for someone else. William nodded. "I'm sorry, Luis. I always wished." He stopped speaking. Is that why he broke off contact with me? Did he think I wouldn't approve or something? My eyes started tearing up. "At first, we were a little afraid, but your dad knew you, and he knew you would be accepting of him. The reason he stopped talking to you was to keep you safe. There's something you need to know about Fairway." He pointed back at the table where we were sitting. "I need you to listen and not say anything for a while. What I'm about to say might sound ridiculous, but you need to trust me. Can you do that?" he asked. I nodded. He took a deep breath. "Your father and I came to Fairway shortly after your parents divorced. We were going to the sea to clear our heads, and on our way back, we stumbled upon this town. We immediately fell in love with the atmosphere, the people, the food. You probably already noticed it, but Fairway isn't exactly normal. Everything here seems perfect. Almost everyone who lives here is happy, healthy, and wealthy. They are living the best lives they could wish for. When your father imagined the beauty of a prospective life here, he was quite open about his wishes for the future. He wanted to stay in, so it didn't take us long to find a house for sale. I was even dumber. As soon as we passed the threshold, I jokingly said that I never wanted to leave this home again." His mouth formed into a crooked smile. "And well, you see, this is the part that will be harder to understand. Whenever you wish for something in Fairway, you receive it, no matter the consequences. The town committee came and warned us, but it was already too late, and frankly, we didn't believe them, until I tried to go outside for groceries." I rolled my eyes. I had no idea what I expected coming here, and William was starting to creep me out. "So sorry you don't enjoy your perfect life," I sarcastically said. He held his fingers to his mouth. "Please, Luis," he continued. "We don't know exactly what it is. The spirits of this town give the people anything they want, and almost anyone who comes here never wants to leave again. Why would they? That's how they trick them. The first wishes are usually humble, simple, but as soon as they get more complicated, or when people slip up, they regret ever stepping foot in this hell, these hidden creatures or spirits or whatever. They feed upon the agony and the pain, as well as on the happiness. They don't care or differentiate." William got up to get a piece of paper from one of the shelves. "The people are careful, but everyone slips up from time to time. The young gentleman you met outside, he lost his mother to an awful wish. Her blood marked our street and made everyone remember for a moment that not everything here is perfect. Children make the most mistakes, of course. Some parents wish on the day that they are born that they will lose their ability to speak. Parents wish for their significant other to disappear in the heat of a fight. Life here isn't perfect. We are always one step away from excruciating pain. That's why your father tried to distance himself from you, to assure that you would never get into the danger here. For a while, he was scared to speak at all." I tried to say something, but William cut me off again. "I know I'm going against his wishes by inviting you, and trust me, I would never have taken the risk if it wasn't for the state he is currently in. I wish, I want to, I would love if. All these things can be used by them to bring something upon you that you will deeply regret. So please, do me the favor and pick your words extremely carefully." Couldn't help but laugh. Not only was this whole situation completely absurd, but William also seemed to be a real maniac. "So if Dad wished for something terrible, can't you just wish for it to be over?" I mocked him. "Doesn't work that way. I didn't just invite you here so you could see your father. I'm hoping you might be able to save him." He passed over the piece of paper. This is what he wrote in his diary before he started getting sick. I ripped it out. The entry was dated a day after my college graduation, and my father explains how terrible he is feeling for not being there for me, for abandoning me, and how he tried to live with this for so many years. Then he wrote this: "How can I ever accept it? I don't deserve peace. My daughter will never forgive me, and I would much rather die a slow and painful death than living a life with these thoughts that are eating me up alive." I looked back at William, whose eyes were now filling up with tears. I felt a lump forming in my throat. "Can I please see him now?" I asked. He looked nothing like the man I remembered. The few hairs he had left had turned gray. He was skinny to the bone, and every breath he took sounded like pure agony. "Dad?" I pushed out. William put a hand on my shoulder. "He's still sleeping. He sleeps most of the time," he whispered. "But maybe, if you stayed for a while, you could help him. Maybe you can change his wish." I took a step away from the room. I felt sick. Everything around me was turning. I could hardly breathe anymore. This was completely insane, and this weird old man was not going to sell his senseless ideas to me. My father abandoned me to live a perfect life in a town far away from me. Still, seeing him this sick was hurting me in a way I could never imagine, but saying that this happened because of some fucking wish was simply malicious. I ran down the stairs to get outside. I heard William's footsteps close behind me. He kept begging and shouting something, but when I reached my car, his voice had turned quieter. He wouldn't come closer than the front door. That was fine with me. I couldn't take another look at this shitty yellow house, so I jumped in my car and started driving. My vision was getting blurry from the tears, but I didn't care. I kept pushing on the gas pedal, getting faster and faster until I reached the outer edges of town and saw the leaving Fairway sign. That's when I crashed. My car made an abrupt stop, giving me whiplash. The seatbelt was pressing into my skin, and my nose started bleeding. Slowly, I removed the belt and tried to open the door. I wondered if I had hit a deer or something. My legs were shaking as I carefully got out of the car. My head was hurting like hell, but it got even worse. There was nothing in front of me, nothing but an empty street, and no matter how hard I tried, I simply couldn't move past the Fairway sign. I have always had the ability to lucid dream. It was something I was just able to do for as long as I can remember. My dreams would generally be completely normal, until recently when I started having regular, reoccurring nightmares. I would wake up in my bed, except my apartment looked old and rotted, with a repulsive smell of rust and mold. Things only got weirder as I began exploring outside of my apartment. After walking through the door, I would be standing on an empty street of an empty neighborhood, one I don't recognize. The street signs were all in a language I've never seen before, and the roads would stretch for miles. The sidewalks would be lined with identical buildings, with strange architecture. I noticed if I followed the same street for too long, I would reach a dead end. Eventually, after exploring this strange dream world for what seemed like days, I noticed a rusted metal staircase on the side of one of the buildings. Once I reached the rooftop, I saw that all the buildings were connected by rusted metal bridges. I quickly became obsessed over exploring this odd nightmare world. After continuous nights of running through the rooftops of the buildings, I came across another staircase leading up into the dark, empty sky. It seemed to go up for miles, and as I continued my ascent, something very, very strange happened. I came upon another neighborhood, floating in the sky. The roads were replaced with a labyrinth of rusty bridges leading in every direction. As I explored the maze of bridges and staircases, I noticed a feeling I hadn't felt in my entire time spent in the dreams. I felt another presence. I could feel it following behind me from a distance, keeping a steady pace. The further I got into this area of my dream world, the closer this presence seemed to approach. Over time, this presence began to get so close I started to notice faint shadows moving in the distance, as I developed an uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. At this point, I feel like I have spent months in this place, wandering around mindlessly with no end destination. After turning a corner, I found myself in a dark hallway, which was out of place from the maze of brick buildings and floating bridges. This hallway had a warm, familiar feeling to it, and as I moved down it, a bright yellow door became visible at the end. I approached the door and turned the handle. The door slowly creeps open as I enter to see my apartment. Everything looked normal, left exactly how it was when I went to sleep that night. Suddenly, the door behind me swings back open with incredible force as a bone-chilling breeze seems to blow straight through me. A large, black figure begins to manifest in front of me. The figure was pitch black with no defined facial features, besides its eyes, which were lifeless and white. We stared at each other for a brief moment before it darted down the hallway towards my bedroom. As I heard my bedroom door fly open and slam against the wall, the sound made my ears ring as I quickly followed behind. I saw myself lying in bed fast asleep with the creature perched on my chest. I could feel its long, skinny figure against my body as it reached out its arms to grab hold of my head. As it leaned in closer, I could feel its ice-cold breath against my cheek. The creature raised its head. It turned its head as I heard the bones of its neck crack and pop as it turned to look at me. A mouth began to manifest on the creature's face as it raised its finger to point at me, as it let out a blood-curdling, high-pitched scream. My vision began to fade as I awoke in my bed in the real world. I've been awake for days now, too scared that if I did sleep, I'd awake in that nightmare world again. I've been noticing a faint shadow in the corner of my eye, and it's approaching ever closer. I genuinely hate sleeping with my bedroom door closed. I've always hated it. It makes me feel trapped. My wife, thankfully, more or less tolerates this as she can listen to the house. Wanting the door left ajar, the dreams came back to me the other day. First memory I recall, from when I was around 2 years old, has been quite crucial in shaping my life. I'm standing in knee-high grass, my toddler socks barely clinging to my patella. My grandmother is a few paces away preparing a picnic. Grandfather setting up the cheap plastic Skittles, the kind filled with water that you get for a couple of bucks on the stands outside those tourist shacks. My mother looks thinner than I've ever known her. My dad's hair is black. I'd say again, but in all my years of life, I've never been able to recall his hair being less than salt and pepper. It's warm, late summer in my hometown. A warm and oh-so-subtle breeze wafts lazily across the field and lifts over the road that snakes through the fields 100 or so yards away. This is my home, not just this town, but the land. I know that this place is my home, that I live here, and I belong here. It's the briefest flash of memory, dimmed with age, but I can see it all. I know I was there, that this happened, but everyone has always told me that it was just a dream. I lived with my parents in that town till I was 18, and every day on the route to school, I passed that field. When I was 6, they built houses on it. Never have I felt that anything could be more wrong, and that's when the dreams began. At least, that's when I recall them starting. Every night for 3 weeks, I was racked with nightmares. I would lie paralyzed in the dark room, skin frozen, and panicked eyes darting to and fro, until finally I would see it. It never really appeared or disappeared, more like I was simply able to process its existence, once it felt like I deserved to. This entity, a gangly black huddle, that would billow over my desk chair would sit and wait out the night with me. It never moved, never spoke. But every nerve ending of my 7-year-old body screamed at me to run. What I was seeing was simply wrong. I tried screaming. I know I did. All that ever came out was a hoarse whisper. I tried to smash my arm against the wall, waking up my parents, but they never came, and though my arm was black with bruises each morning, the flimsy drywall never showed so much as a scratch. After around 3 weeks of this, the entity left. In its wake came a host of other entities that haunted my nights, but not the whaler outside the window, nor the peeper in the loft hatch, or even the one that tore out my upper left molar, left me as terrified as it had. I named it the Chairman. I was 7 and creativity was not my strong suit. Weeks more I suffered these living dreams, paralyzed and limp on the mattress till my legs grew cold with stale urine. Come morning, my parents despaired, and I was yelled at for ruining the sheets again, causing more washing, making only problems. The last night I encountered any of these creatures came the day I asked my parents when I had moved out of our old house. They were somewhat perplexed, Dad telling me that we'd never moved. I'd always lived in this house. This was wrong though. I knew that we had just lived a few blocks away, on the edge of the fields with the new buildings. I was adamant in my truth until my mom pulled out a photo album, documenting their story in their new house. I saw through these images their preparations for my arrival, the day they brought me home, and hundreds of pudgy baby photos detailing the events of my every birthday party, every new toy, and every outing up to my 8-year-old self. Irrevocable proof that I had always lived in the family home. As always, the entities watched as I lay, pinned down to the mattress, a cold sweat tracing lines in my pajamas. The whaler howled outside, yellow pinpricks lighting through the curtains. Peeper stared, iridescent orbs swiveling, pupils of electric blue scanning me as drool dripped from the cavity in the ceiling. Tooth Stealer seemed to enjoy his game. It crept closer, freezing as I kept my eyes on it and dashing forwards with every blink. Its hands were in my mouth when the chairman stood up and left. Normally I never saw it leave. I'd either pass out or it would dissipate in the gloom, taking the others with it. This time, it rose and wandered. Soundless steps across my bedroom floor, grasped the handle and left, through the door. 27 years I've slept peacefully. I've got my kid, and each night I thank whatever deity is listening that I can fall asleep next to my wife. I don't even have nightmares, aside from the few stress-related ones. I've made an appointment to see a psychiatrist though, as I'd much rather believe that I'm suffering some psychotic break than believe the alternative. See, the other night I couldn't sleep. My wife always sleeps facing away from me, but we press our backs together. It's a comfort. Our bedroom door swung open. This wouldn't have been odd if my son were standing on the other side, or even if the cat decided it wanted to claim my pillow again. Praying that someone had left the landing window open, I got up and pushed it back to its almost closed but not quite position. It took a while to fall asleep that night. I remember seeing 1:35 a.m. on the clock last I checked, but in retrospect, I'd happily take a rushed morning and tired day at work over this racking self-doubt. See, the chairman is back. I live 700 miles from where I grew up. I've never once felt at home. That much I know. But I'm not going to put this innate sense of isolation on lack of belonging down to some weird dream my toddler self had. But feeling myself lie there, enveloped in cold sweat with no warmth at all, pressed against my back, and seeing yellow pinpricks through the blinds again. For hours I lay, holding a staring match with whatever was outside the window. Memories that I blocked out flooding back to me. The scratching on the ceiling made my skin crawl, but I was unable to turn my head, let alone roll over. Morning finally came, and I woke to blood on my pillow. I'm now short another molar, bottom left this time. But the one thing that terrifies me beyond all else is that my son lost a tooth last night too, and he told me that something walked into his room, sat in his chair, and watched him all night long. I need help. The doorway in the desert. I find myself alone and devoid of normal human interaction during this epidemic. The lockdown ordered by my country's prime minister requires non-key workers to stay at home at all times, to only leave for an hour's exercise and to gather groceries. I do not exercise. In years prior to this lockdown, I already isolated myself, fearful of my fellow man. I am myself detached from the outside world and humans altogether. I have little interest in my fellow man and would much rather be by myself. But as science tells us, humans are a group creature. Left alone, our minds wander. I now feel my mind has wandered too far and is slipping away from my weak grasp. Being a hypochondriac and harboring an intense fear of human interaction, I never leave the safety of my house. The only time I expose my clean self to the dirty outside atmosphere is when I open my door to greet the delivery man that drops my groceries off. While doing so, I attempt to act as a normal human with a polite welcoming and the such. It's now evening. A soft golden haze of sunlight floods my room. I sit on my bed, thoughts stirring within my frail and worn mind. My head forever aching. The air is thick and stale in here. I am analyzing the old gray paint of my bedroom walls, pondering about the things it had seen over the years, with a handful of people inhabiting this house before me. There is something beyond painful about a hunger for human life, when you fear and are unable to understand humans, like a prisoner craving freedom, but is too scared to jump off a summit in order to escape pursuing guards. I feel deep brittle cracks within me, my brain now stale and fragile. I am casted away from society and left to rot, most likely by my own doing. I stare, still at my wall. Strange, a warm sensation comes over me, one rising to my head. My sight becomes stretched, warped almost. I feel odd, misplaced. I can feel my soul and mind being pulled from my fleshy tomb, and darkness engulfs me. I awake to heat and a beaming light bearing through my eyelids. The air feels fresh and light, much unlike my bedroom prison. I open my eyelids. My vision is hazy, and my mind disoriented. I find myself in the middle of a desert, endless plains of gold and red grain scorched by the relentless sun. A vast blue sky overwatching the ocean of sand. I sat up, perplexed. Am I dreaming? I pinched myself to my dismay. I remain in this peculiar land. I look around frantically. The horizon was a simple contrast of two colors, sand until it reached the sky, until I saw it. A lone stone doorway, about 100 yards away from me. I rise to my feet, brushing the sand off my clothes, and walked over curiously, the heat softly engulfing me. Arriving at the peculiar building, I examined it curiously. Old and weathered stones, with cracked mortar holding it together, and a thick, dark wood door. The wood looked just as old as the stonework, with deep cracks and rigid iron bands reinforcing it. This doorway looked like it was straight from an archaic time. Was I still in 2020? What is this place? Why is this doorway in the middle of a desert? My mind raced and I feared for my sanity at the harrowing realization I was truly awake and stranded in God knows where. I grasped the thick metal handle and pulled. Surprised, the door gave no resistance, almost as if I were being invited inside. A musty, thick odor of what must be centuries, maybe even millenniums of air hit me in the face. The smell of old stone, and something else I can't put my finger on. In front of me are a series of steps leading down a couple of meters to a lit entrance leading somewhere. I descended the steps and entered a passageway. Its walls were lined with ancient-style torches, bare flames ablaze and illuminating my path. The smell of history still lining my nostrils. The corridor stretched some 30 yards and hit a dead end. Nothing about this place seemed right. The farther I ventured down the corridor, The more unease crept up my back. Never have I ever witnessed, nor experienced anything uncanny as this. I would sooner return to my bedroom prison, and my thoughts then spend another second in this unnatural place. I became more unsettled with each step, although I couldn't help but move forward, as if some sort of force was influencing me so. I reached the end of the passageway. Nothing but a sturdy ancient stone wall existed, the influence forcing my movements now fading as I reached the end, and a flame of reassurance grew within my empty stomach. I turned and started to make my way back to the stairs, although not knowing what to do when I left this accursed passageway. It still felt good with every inch away from that wall. Ascending the steps, the intense desert sunlight welcoming me back out of what feels like hell. Suddenly a swift bird of some sort hurled past me, causing my heart to nearly stop. The whole ordeal grew stranger. During my short time out in the desert, I heard and saw no animals of any sort. Even though it was not a human, I still felt overjoyed at some company. My face was painted with glee as I headed back down the stairs where I went. It was fluttering against the wall at the end of the corridor. I watched curiously as it determinedly pecked and flew against the stonework. With that same unease creeping up me again whilst watching, I decided to leave, and hopefully the bird would stay where I knew where it was. Exiting through the door and into the desert heat, I turned back to face the stairway. The glow of the torches was suddenly snuffed, leaving the stairway enshrouded in darkness. The door slammed shut in front of me by some otherworldly force. Not a second later, my soul and mind were pulled from that place. Although just before leaving, I felt a surge of terror I never knew was possible to feel, as if I had narrowly escaped some imminent doom, sure to snatch me. I awoke back to being sat on my bed, cold beads of sweat cloaking my skin. The familiar stale and claustrophobic room was now a haven, and I rejoiced at my return, my brain still trying to fully comprehend earlier's happenings. I rose from my bed and found a new appreciation for my earthly presence. I went into the kitchen and cooked up a vibrant, delicious meal, omelet with peppers and tomatoes. I took it with me to sit on my sofa with the TV on. I was watching a documentary about other dimensions, higher beings and the such, intrigued whilst I devoured on my food. The nature of the documentary aroused memories of my earlier journey. What was that place? I thought to myself in deep thought. Although Earth has its share of majestic deserts, the one I had been previously dropped in didn't feel earthly, nor was it familiar with Earth's landscapes. Being a desert, I could definitely tell it was of no place on the planet I live. A few hours later, with night descending and my meal devoured long ago, still taking in this long documentary, I made a healthy choice to slumber where I sat. Slumping back into the sofa, I looked up at my ceiling, resting my head and thoughts, gently relaxing my body. Warm air beat down on my face. Even with my eyes shut, I knew I was back. Opening my eyes to a blazing sun and coarse sand against my hands and the back of my neck, I rose to a sitting position. Hello again, strange place, I thought, greeted by the endless seas of sand and the ocean of blue above. I turned my sights around and was met yet again with the now familiar doorway. It now resided a little closer to me than before. A vague melancholy grew within me from being pulled from my safe home and back to this abysmal land. I left before, I can leave again, I thought, reassuring my rising anxiety. Standing up and brushing the sand from my trousers and arms, I commenced a steady and wary walk to the doorway, taking in this luscious dirt warmth and majestic sky. Just as it had been left previously, it remained tightly shut. With nothing else here, I might as well explore it again, in hopes of triggering that unprecedented departure. Grasping the iron handle and yanking it open, I was met with little success. It held rather stiff. Remembering the bird that flew in after me in my previous visit, a tinge of curiosity thrived. Yet reminiscing over the animal, suddenly the door flung open, almost sending me backwards startled. The same smell of old stone and the other odor I couldn't quite place swiftly invaded my nostrils upon opening. I could see the stairway and the glow of torches just after it, and began descending through the door. Upon reaching the end of the stairs, and met with the same illuminated passageway with those archaic torches spanning the walls to the end. I strained my vision at the dead-end wall. It appeared further away now, with nothing on the floor just before it. Making my way warily down the passageway, my eyes never leaving the distant object on the floor, the same uneasiness thrived inside my soul. Reaching the end and deciphering the object laid on the floor, I felt nothing but terror and pure apprehension. On the ground in front of me was the bird. It lay there, lifeless, with its throat appearing to be viciously and crudely gnawed at by what could only be a wild animal. Although there was no other animals out here, I needed to get out of there. I turned around and retreated from that accursed wall as fast as I could, sprinting past the torches. During my escape, my foot caught on some inconvenient cobble, sending me jolting forwards face first into the floor. Laying there in pain, with the sense of dread unhalted, the illuminating torches perched upon the walls were snuffed as I was left in pure darkness. The already burning fire of fear now blazed into a full-on inferno of terror. I could feel something unseen to me drawing nearer within the blackness. I attempted to crawl away in an escape, clutching at cold cobbles paving the passageway. Nearer and nearer it drew, the unrelenting scourge of unrevealed evil closing in on me. Some few meters further in my pathetic retreat, grunting in pain, when I felt whatever was stalking me only a breath away, I was pulled from that wicked crypt that concealed the sinister trapper. My soul and body tugged away to safety from those atrocious clutches. Finding myself back within the comfort of my home, I broke down into tears. The panic-fueled adrenaline still coursing through my body, my arms and legs twitching, and my mind utterly horrified. I now gravely feared returning to that damned Fey place. For days, I would try to keep my mind occupied, for fear of slipping into daydream and sleep, possibly being taken back there. The paranoia, the stress, the fear. I mustered up the courage to enter the outside world, to be among the once estranged, now comfortable earth. Taking one step out the door, the clean air washed through me. Sounds of birds and leaves rustling surrounded me pleasurably. It was a beautiful sunny day. I decided to walk down a trail nearby my house, in an attempt to occupy my mind with more positive thoughts, rather than the nightmarish instances of that godforsaken plain. Making my way down the soft trail, the luscious grass at either side, and a neat row of trees, I spotted a fellow human some 20 yards down the track. I was slightly anxious at first, but I soon reassured myself. To converse with a person, after what happened, I imagine would do me a great heartening. I approached closer. They were coming from the opposite way. It was an old man. "Hello," I said politely but shy. "Hello, son. How are you doing?" He replied, "Not too bad, thank you. Been inside a lot and thought I'd give going outside a try." I returned. He gave me a soft smile and said farewell. During this epidemic, people don't want to loiter around each other for too long, I've heard. Some few minutes later, I found myself pondering, appreciating the countryside I had long again laid eyes on. I stopped for a minute and gathered my bearings, taking in the sounds of trees, birds, and the smell of dirt. No. I felt myself zooming out, extracted from where I stand and back into that place. I awoke, but not amidst the desert now. The glow of torches and the hard stony floor pressing against my back told me exactly where I was. Anywhere but here. I cried to myself internally. I laid, too scared to move or shift my view, as wet slapping and strange gargles sounded off further into the passageway. I conjured up so much strength to rival my terror as I turned my head slowly to my left toward the end of the corridor, at whatever was emitting such awful noises. I jolted up from the ground, with sheer alarm at the horror which my unfortunate eyes beheld. A black, slimy, writhing mass of eel-like appendages, and inky faces with intense white eyes glaring right at me, with such immense hatred. Mere masks concealing a farther, more, beyond, sinister thing. I screamed until my vocal cords became bloody and torn, my eyes growing so wide they almost popped out of my skull, my body frozen with vast goosebumps threatening to tear through my skin. I could feel my heart almost explode, my mind pained and my soul utterly terrorized beyond imaginable. I wept, uncomprehending to the heinous horror that gazed upon me with glee at my distress. "Take me back, please, take me back," I screamed to the heavens. The abomination laying at the end of this twisted passageway began croaking and gargling. My staggered mind deciphered the thing was laughing at me, taunting. "I'm not going anywhere," it croaked, spitting tar-like fluid from its gaping mouth, lined and warped, canine-like teeth used for gnawing. Petrified, my eyes threatening to depart from my skull, I was frozen still at the horror I beheld. It started to slither swiftly towards me, leaving a crude trail of black fluid smeared upon the cobbles as it advanced. My God, the horror. My feet felt like lead, my body rigid, the shock of what I witnessed stunning my being, rendering it static. The monster had reached me now, wrapping its black eel-like appendages around me. My skin burned as they latched onto me. Its faces rose up to me. That familiar smell I couldn't place before now, pungent beyond imagination. The toxic fumes of evil invading my lungs and permeating within my soul. I looked into its intense white orbs, its wide, gaping mouths, and the dripping black sabers lining them. "You will now meet my master," it croaked maliciously, black slime splattering my face. As the thing lashed itself around me, I was torn from that awful crypt, pulled through infinite black space, the void that holds all the stars. Farther and farther, I felt nauseous beyond belief, faster than the speed of light, faster than anything imaginable. I saw worlds, planets, life, thrown through the abysmal ocean that is the universe, unbounded, empty. Expanses of the ebony void stretched underneath me and so above me. Unlimited stars all around me. No human can ever comprehend what I saw. Pulled farther and farther through the endless blackness, to a far pit where comprehensible life exists not. I came to a sudden stop, held amidst the emptiness. My body feeling too sick to be alive, my mind too dumbfounded to operate. I was clasped before a great unknown, my microscopic body brought to an unending, cosmic presence, spanning to the furthest stars, its writhing, wriggling influence sucking into all crevices and chasms of the void. It is like water. It sees me. I can feel my mind melt, my soul rot, my existence dissolving beneath its titanic gaze. My God, it sees me. Help. As immensely and horrifying as I was snared into this place, I was thrown back through space, as a cat throws a mouse when it grows bored of tormenting it. Through endless blackness, I began to fade, slipping into a slumber as my tiny body raced through the void. I awoke. I awoke on the very trail I had been crudely pulled from. It was night now, the vast dark canvas open for any potential horror. I laid there, unbelievably weak, barely enough energy to keep my eyes open. My arms and legs felt limp, like lead. I can still feel the burns. I can still see that monster's faces and dripping teeth. And I can still see that. No, I can see it. Like water. I see it in the stars. Please, God, save me.